So nice to see all of your shining faces, shining with the afterglow of Zazen. Tonight, I want to talk about hoarding, poverty, and Zen practice. With the clear agreement that practice is it's a practice of awareness and discernment, not judgment. Okay, I think I should always precede my talks with that, so that we know the intention is to encourage awareness where there is no awareness, if in fact there isn't. I mean, it's a wonderful thing if every talk you hear gives you some little something that you hadn't noticed before. And it just encourages and confirms the process of continuing to look into anything and everything in our lives, which is what I enjoy about giving Dharma talks. I'm always seeing things that I hadn't seen, and want to share these insights. So the three poisons, we are in a civilization that glorifies and practices the three poisons, infuses our cultural life, our social exchange networks with the three poisons, all of which grow out of a basic ignorance of the true interdependent nature of life. So what are the three poisons? Greed, which is based in a sense of separate self and not having enough, or maybe never having enough. Hostility, which is all about claiming and guarding territory, which can be psychic territory, it can be physical territory. And ignorance, which is lack of awareness of the nature, the true nature, the most essential nature of everything. When we are so distracted by all the noise and dazzle of our current world, that we are unable to discern appearance and their nature and the nature of appearances. So, but today I just want to talk about greed. In the 8 awakenings of great beings, one of the 8 awakenings is knowing how much is enough, which is a wonderful phrase, knowing how much is enough. I use that a lot. How much is enough? It's applicable all over the place. I was listening to a brief piece on NPR about a new book of poems titled Hoarders. Some of you may have heard that piece. Poems that expressed the experience of hoarding, what the mind of the hoarder is trapped in, a behavior that's compelled by greed and anxiety, the anxiety that animates greed. Greed and anxiety go together. Hoarding in its most difficult flowering is extreme. However, we all tend to get caught up to a certain degree by the basic energy of hoarding. Our whole civilization is caught up in this. The 10,000 things are marketed continually in every shared surface, marketed to promise inner states of mind. So we very easily can mistake things for what seems to be missing. So love, status, glamour, youth, leisure, the promise, so much of what we are all completely busy with all the time, or many of the things that were promised a greater sense of leisure. And we are organized around our desires. And this material culture is built on this foundation, the foundation of desire, of not knowing how much is enough, of not being too interested in enough. So I'd like to look more closely at the Dharma of hoarding, what the Dharma eye sees as we look at this energy in ourselves and others, and the modern corporate civilization that is founded on getting more than is needed and holding on to it. Always guided, we're always turned collectively in that direction and investing our resources toward having more or making sure we maintain what we have. And this mind state proliferates into a world that is drowning in toxic garbage. We are overwhelmed by our stuff, material stuff, but also busyness stuff. So anyway, that brought to mind Marie Kondo. Are you familiar? Is anybody familiar with Marie Kondo? She was a phenomenon that just kind of hit the scene a while back. And her book, Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and also her Netflix series. She does a service to bringing awareness to seriously disordered households. Her insight into basic principles of organizing stuff is a natural and very useful service in our modern overstuffed world. So if you've seen her on the Netflix show, when she first gets to a household, she introduces herself and says what they're going to do. And then before they begin the work, she sits on the floor quietly for a few minutes of simple stillness and presence. It's very striking because we're, watching it, you're in the mindset of what usually happens in a show. It's like continuous presentation, but she stops and demonstrates this quietude to the homes where she's working. And it may be the very first sense of quietude in these houses that are completely overwhelmed by their stuff, that are overwhelmed by material acquisition and the clutter that comes from constant seeking and gathering, and then not being able to let go of any of it. So there's a correlation here with what we practice with what we experience in the practice of Zazen, for instance. And how difficult it can be to just let go of the material in the thinking mind, just for now as we sit on the ground. When no thinking is necessary, it's not needed, but we're holding on and we keep holding on, usually. It takes a while to soften the grip. Doesn't it feel like your thoughts are holding on to you? It does to me. When I first sit in Zazen, I'm held on to. And it would seem really simple that we could just let go. We don't need him right now, let him go. But it takes a while. It's not so simple. It's not so simple. So the method that we use in teaching our initial approach to Zazen is substitution. Substitution, kind of the way we do it with a toddler who has found a scissors and is running around with scissors. Well, if you take it from the toddler, they'll just collapse into misery and outrage. However, if you substitute something else for the scissors, they'll easily let them go. And we use the same principle when beginning Zazen, substituting. We substitute, we use something neutral like the breath or sound. Breath just leads to breath. One breath leads to another breath. Whereas one thought leads to another thought, leads us eventually, potentially, all over the world and throughout time. One thought can lead to us to 40 years ago in our memory. So we have a transition object when we take up Zazen, which is the breath. Nothing is missing in the breath. It's complete. And it continually replenishes itself just as simply and completely. So we go from being caught up in thinking and doing and holding on to it and following its lead, which is what our daily round is about. We begin there and then we sit into Zazen, where we use this transition object of the breath or listening to sound, which helps us move from activity to quiet and stillness, and eventually just presence itself, where even the transition object is no longer needed. We can just be present, complete as is. We use breath until we are thoroughly present in breath. And the mind and heart relaxes, and only awareness remains. Natural awareness. Nothing to be gotten. Natural awareness. So here's a passage from this poetry volume, Hoarders. I want desperately to change. Digging in neighborhood trash bins, a flashlight strapped to her head, she pulls out Chase credit card statements, styrofoam food containers, Starbucks reusable plastic cups. So I want to ask, how many things do you handle every day? How many things do you handle? And how many handle you? So I'd like us to do a very brief exercise. I'm going to time us for 1 minute. I want you right where you are to start counting the objects in the environment around you, starting right now. Okay. This is an awareness exercise of a sort. We can come up with millions of different kinds of awareness exercises, and this is one. So how far did you get? I would like to hear numbers. If you would unmute and just let me know, call out the number of things you counted in that 1 minute.
83.
80.
64.
58.
56.
65.
72.
Wow.
Okay. A fair number for 1 minute in the immediate environment. And everybody here is inside in one room of the house, in one little segment of the purview, visual purview, right? I don't know if you've seen this, this book called Material World, A Global Family Portrait.
Yeah.
It's a picture book, and it shows people from all different cultures and what they own set out. It's amazing. And so you go from families that have just a few jars and jugs to families that are standing in the midst of an explosion of objects and electronic gadgetry, which is filled with rare earth toxic materials. It's a good thing just to take a look at what we own. What's the connection between waking up to this hoarding? And I'm not saying we're hoarders. We're not even hoarders. I mean, maybe some of you are in your most open room in the house, but that may not be an issue, material hoarding. But what is the connection between waking up to this hoarding energy and prompting and survival on the planet? How can this world, in all its earth element and political and social and economic cultural arrangements, possibly support this level of consumption for close to 8 billion people? So this practice that is based in the tremendous simplicity that helps us wake up to the enormous clutter, beginning with our own minds and how it is reflected out into this hugely proliferated material civilization. It's stunning. So we who are gathered here value awareness. We find it, we put it front and center in our sense of the world, in our ethical conduct, in the heart of wisdom. And we can take a lesson in being true to the path from looking at this broader cultural pattern of being trapped in hoarding mind. In Buddhism, and actually in any of the major spiritual traditions, there's a teaching of mendicancy, poverty, which denotes renunciation of worldly possessions and perhaps involves begging, but it certainly involves purity of heart and simplicity. Using what is necessary, sharing, reusing until a thing can no longer be used, being mindful of what we acquire and the stream of manufacture and decay of each of the objects that we manufacture. This is all to be aware. We should be aware. This is part of following the way of the Bodhisattva, and helps us use our energies and our resources to care for earth and our neighbors, which is the intention behind mendicancy, chosen poverty. It's chosen poverty. So what are focusing on our needs? Well, in the Vinaya, the teachings, the rules for monks, for the ordained, there are 4 requisites: food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. Food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. Francis Ido Carney, who trained at Ryokan's temple in Japan and is the teacher of Olympia Zen Center, and a wonderful writer and elder in the Zen practice. She has, as part of her center, the practice of takahatsu, which is begging, sacred begging. which gives the, and it's an old tradition in Japan. Here, doing it, it really stands out as odd, but there's no active it's not panhandling. It's standing there in the full dignity of the silent, upright, present human being holding out a bowl, an empty bowl. So here's what she says about Takahatsu. It teaches us the fundamental lessons of the Buddha: to be dependent on everyone, to live our original homelessness, to include the homeless in thought and deed, to share everything, to accept what comes to us, to be generous, to be humble in society, to recognize the timid, to resist fame, to be modest, to resist the acquisition of goods, to throw off ego, and to have the courage to be fully visible in practice. Each of these could be a wonderful, we could go on and on about it. To be fully visible in practice. So often we come to Zen practice with the intention of hiding out, but we don't get very far with that. That's part of the method, is what are you hiding? And who is hiding? And what's so bad about you anyway that you can't be completely transparent? This is what practice over time really, really helps us throw off. And that's what we say, we get rid of self-consciousness. Oh yeah, let's just get rid of the self. Just that we're holding on to and we cannot let go of, and is holding on to us. So back to Takahatsu. So I don't mean to say that we all need to take that up, which is practiced by the homeless without choice every day, here and all over the world. But let's consider the wisdom that it expresses. And we do well to acknowledge the existential reality it demonstrates. We are all one calamity away from homeless and at the mercy of our neighbors. From leaning much more closely into the goodwill of our neighbors and also the generosity of the earth, which is sorely pressed in its systems by our current excess. The Buddha addresses this issue in the Four Noble Truths, that our lack of well-being does not come from not having enough, rather from the ignorance of our own ingrained belief that the boundless progress which results from technology and the market can somehow liberate us from the limitations of nature and society. It's a major delusion. Buddhism challenges our understanding of poverty by contextualizing the problem in a different way. One which questions the assumptions that still dominate our thinking about undeveloped societies. In the Anguttara Nikaya, for example, the Buddha says that a person is poor who indulges in gaining and holding on to sense pleasures and is sunk in dukkha, because this kind of gaining and holding on to leads to borrowing and increasing debt, thus increasing suffering. He talks about that, how many people here are carrying a debt load. It's built into, we are encouraged. Our credit score increases by the amount of debt we carry. That's perverted. Buddhism affirms an attitude of non-attachment toward material goods, and promotes the virtue of having less wants, having fewer wants. But that is not the same as encouraging poverty. Poverty, you know, what Jesus said about a rich man can know, let's see, what is it? Sorry. Oh, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And there's such wisdom in that, applicable to each of us. And we are incredibly rich, even those of us who are low income, especially those of us who practice the Dharma, which is the greatest treasure. Poverty, as ordinarily understood in early Buddhism, consists in lacking the basic material requirements for leading a decent life and for practicing, free from hunger, exposure, and disease. Buddhism recognizes the importance of such minimum material needs, even in the case of those who aspire to the spiritual goal. So therefore, the monks, the possession of the monks during so much of the history, in the history of Buddhism, was the personal possessions were 2 robes so that one could be washed. Wow, they're still robed. And their bowls, their eating bowl, their begging bowl, and medicine. That was what their personal possessions consist of, and that is still true in Theravadan monasteries. The monastery can provide more fully, but a monk cannot ask for anything. So, for instance, at Great Vow, a number of years ago, Ajahn Amaro, who is he's the abbot of Abhayagiri in California, at mealtime, you know, and monks would eat breakfast and lunch, and that was it. At mealtime, he would come down the serving line with his bowl. He couldn't even ask for, he could not ask for, he could just receive what was given. So he had this way of kind of lighting up when he'd get to a dish that looked particularly delicious. And everybody who was serving him had to really pay attention to his body language to see when it was enough, and when it was too little, and when it was too much. So awareness both ways, receptivity and awareness. So I'd like to end here with a wish that there is, first of all, something in this talk that supports in all of us the wisdom of letting go and freedom from getting caught up in thoughts, old grudges, endless desires for this moment to be different, distracted from our true conditions, and freedom from getting caught and held and mindlessly dominated by our possessions, and trying through them to hold on to what cannot be held on to, not for long. And with it, the practice of letting go, to be liberated into each fresh, open, spacious moment that wants a true response. Oh, thank you. May it be so.